senator from the great state of Kentucky. When he started running for office, most of the country knew him as a surrogate for his dad, Ron Paul. Most of the people who were aware of him were already fans of his dad's political career, his dad's political positions. But in a very short period of time, for those who didn't know him, the man has achieved an incredible level of prominence. I don't believe he will be Mitt Romney's vice presidential nominee because, frankly, I think that he is too right on too many issues, and he makes the Republican establishment crazy. But you may have noticed that the Romney campaign is sort of giving off hints that he is, in hopes that they can build some support among the massive support base he has. And, by the way, he's our guest, Senator Rand Paul. How are you, Senator?
Good, Michael. Thanks for that introduction. Do I have to send you a check for such a nice introduction?
No. We're all good. I'm just a big fan, and hopefully I'm going to be on in Louisville sometime soon. And I'll be able to, since that'll be your home state market, we'll have you on. Although we do have a lot of listeners in Kentucky from our Nashville affiliate. Senator, you want Ted Cruz to join you in the U.S. Senate. You, Jim DeMint, Mike Lee, Pat Toomey are getting involved in a Republican primary. You got involved in a Republican primary when your candidate was behind in the polls. Why would you get involved in a race like this?
Well, because I tell people when I started running, what I said over and over again is what I truly believe, that it makes a difference what kind of Republican. Any old Republican won't do. The country, really, we face insolvency. We're borrowing $50,000 a second. And I'll give you an example. Last week we had an amendment to cut 1 penny from the sugar support. It would have saved $7 million. And that may sound like a lot of money to you and I, but $7 million to the government is a drop in the ocean. It would take 140,000 $7 million cuts to get to a $1 trillion deficit, and we couldn't pass it because we lost about 10 Republicans.
But you know what? Let's go back. Let's take a moment, because I think it's important in the state of Texas. David Dewhurst has a lot of money. He's the Republican establishment candidate. Ted Cruz comes from outside there. Talk for a minute, if you would, Senator Rand Paul, about your race in Kentucky, because you were up against kind of the handpicked, I think it was the Attorney General, the Republican establishment candidate, much as Marco Rubio was up against that with Charlie Crist. But talk about your race, if you would.
Well, I think there's a lot of similarities in the sense between mine, Rubio's, and now Ted Cruz's race, is that I think people hunger for something more genuine. They hunger for somebody different than the traditional politician that's done it their whole life. They're looking for somebody actually who will make the tough decisions. So I ran on the old Republican platform, which was getting rid of the Department of Education. We used to always, as Republicans, believe that it was state and local control of education. Ted Cruz still believes that. I still believe that. But most of the rest of the middle bulk of the Republican Party is just sort of waiting around and thinking we can nibble at the edges and balance the budget, and yet they've all got their own sacred cows they continue to vote for. There's so much inertia in Washington that the only way we'll go forward, the only way we have a hope really as a country, is to get young, active people who will vote to change the system, cut the spending, eliminate entire departments. And I think without question, Ted Cruz is that person.
You, Pat Toomey, Mike Lee, Jim DeMint, Marco Rubio, a few of you have really gotten involved in these races like this. What kind of resources have y'all brought to the state of Texas to help Ted in this race?
Well, I'm coming in person on Thursday. We've raised a little money for him. I didn't have as much money to raise as some of the others. I think Senator DeMint has helped in a big way financially and elsewhere and other ways. But I'm going to be coming with Senator Lee on Thursday. We're coming to a Freedom Works event in Dallas. I think we're also going to make a stop in Houston, and all in support of Ted Cruz.
And I hope and pray you are successful. And, folks, early voting started today. It's today through Friday, and I encourage you to get out there and get out there and vote and take somebody with you. You can vote at any precinct. Senator, when you look at the landscape in the United States Senate and the likelihood that let's first talk about just Republican versus Democrat, the likelihood that we'll take back the Senate this November, What are our odds?
50-50. It's right on the margin. We have 3 Republican seats that we're trying to defend, but we have about 5 that we think we could pick up. The big news will be if Ted Cruz wins, it'll be another big victory for the Tea Party, for the conservative wing of the Republican Party. It'll be as big a news as, when Murdoch won in Indiana over an incumbent, because it's basically like Ted Cruz is going up against an opponent that is virtually like an incumbent. So if he wins, it'll be big news. But it's 50-50 to take over the Senate, I think.
Senator Rand Paul is our guest, when you look at the big issues that'll be coming up in the next legislative session, where you can see a difference between a guy who calls himself a Republican and our kind of Republican, where do you see the big issues where a Ted Cruz would be right and maybe David Dewhurst wouldn't?
Well, I don't know David Dewhurst, but I just really know Ted and know that Ted will make a difference and will stand up on principle for the Constitution. The bottom line is, and see, we've had this debate running for a long time. Hamilton and Madison had it over whether or not the taxing authority is limited. We now have Justice Roberts saying there are no limits to the taxing authority, and people like Ted Cruz and myself, we agree with Madison that said, guess what? It is limited. It's limited by the enumerated powers. The federal government shouldn't do anything the Constitution didn't enumerate and give. And so that's what it's going to take. But the number one problem facing our country is the debt. You cannot spend $1 trillion more than you have every year and do this without repercussions. And we're approaching a time when I think the country itself will be threatened by this debt, not just passing it on to the future, but right now we're losing 1 million jobs a year financing this debt that we have. And my concern is we could actually destroy the currency and have chaos in our country if we don't get our spending under control.
I watched in horror over the weekend as people talked about stepping up security at movie theaters. And I look at the growth of the TSA over the last 10 years, and I think you more than anyone else have led the charge that this organization is out of control, needs to be scaled back. That's one of the problems with David Dewhurst is he killed the TSA anti-groping bill in the state of Texas. But where are we on your efforts to rein in the TSA?
Well, I have 2 proposals. One would privatize it. We have big airports, like in San Francisco, the airport out there has private security. They don't have any TSA. That's the best way, because then when you buy your $500 airline ticket, your airline's providing the securities. They want you to be happy, so they treat you like a person. The TSA, because they're separate and you don't pay them to do it, you pay them indirectly to the government, they really don't care about your dignity. They don't care. Did you hear the story the other day of the man was taking his dad's ashes home?
Oh,
and they
yes.
they took the urn, swirled their finger in the urn of the human ashes, and then accidentally dropped it on the floor, all the while laughing.
And showed no remorse. Horrible.
No remorse.
Well, I thank you for your efforts, Senator Rand Paul.